Good evening, everyone. My name is Greta Lundgaard, and I'd like to welcome you to the March edition of the NFLC panels. And we are really happy to have everyone here today, and make sure everyone has fun. We are going to have a good time and hear what our lovely panel of people have to say to us. So let's go ahead and let me show you who's going to be with us tonight. And I will ask you to introduce yourselves. And we are going to start with Rebecca Aubrey. Just tell us a little bit about yourself. And I will try to get this overlay off. It's not going off. Okay, well, let me see how we want to.
That's okay. It covers the double chin.
Does it cover the double chin?
It does.
Okay,
it does. I kind of actually.
Thank you. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Aubrey. I am a Spanish teacher in Eastern Connecticut. About 14 years of experience teaching from across the pre-K through 8th grade curriculum, but I'm currently settled in at 7th grade and enjoying this lovely chaotic year that we are having in teaching.
Okay. All right. So who'd like to introduce themselves next? Dorie, why don't you start for us?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Dorie Perugini. I'm an elementary school Spanish teacher in Glastonbury Public Schools, also in Connecticut. I currently teach grades 1 through 3, but every year it kind of changes, grades 1 through 5. I'm also a PhD student in applied linguistics and discourse studies at the University of Connecticut, where one of my research interests is the topic of intercultural competence. So I'm super excited to be here with everybody tonight.
Oh, okay. That's going to be really exciting. We're going to have a great talk. Let's just keep going alphabetically. Paris, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Paris Granville. I'm currently in the Bellevue School District in Washington State. And I have a hybrid job in that I'm in the central office supporting world language teachers. I'm the curriculum lead of world language, but I'm also teaching Spanish 3 this year, full remotely. And I have taught every grade level, but I still feel like a new teacher this year, as many of us do.
New exhausted teacher, right? Exactly. Okay, so now, Lyanne, you can take us home.
Hi, I'm Lyanne Terada. I'm a Spanish teacher at Horizon High School in Thornton, Colorado, and I've been teaching for over 20 years. And last year, I just got my master's in educational equity and cultural diversity, and I'm happy to share different things that I've been thinking about and just exploring myself in the midst of our pandemic. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, we are going to explore interculturality tonight and how to embed that into our activities we do in the classroom. It may seem like a misnomer because we are discussing a domain in the learning tools section of the TEL framework. But LT3, Learning Tools Domain 3, says the teacher provides students with a variety of resources that support the development of intercultural communicative competence. So these 4 ladies are really going to talk us through some guiding questions about what that actually means in the classroom. And we are going to be going through the criteria, the sub-criteria for the criterion of LT3. And so, ladies, let's just start with this one. And I'm just going to throw the question out there and y'all can kind of consider how to address it. But this is about this idea of facilitating student investigation and interaction with authentic materials. And the goal is to get them beyond just the products of the target culture. I think we would all agree that is one of the keys to intercultural competency, is to get beyond the superficial and to get to what actually is that intercultural piece. So who'd like to start us with this? So how can we facilitate that?
If we could start with a common understanding of what we mean by authentic. It's one of the places I really like to start with, and I don't know if everyone's on the same page with me on this, but I really like to try to, as much as possible, limit that realm to materials, whether it's digital or print or artifacts that are made for the target culture by the target culture, as opposed to something, not necessarily dismissing the value of it, but as opposed to something that's been made just for the purpose of studying the target culture.
And then I feel like that gives us the purpose for looking at it. In that, why would I look at something that was authentic? Because I need to uncover the perspectives. And if it's a teacher-generated material, it won't have that perspective integrated in it. And to examine that with novice speakers, I like to start with, what are the core values behind that? Because that's just one word. Identifying, solidarity is the value behind this recycling ad, or community is the core value behind this ad. And then we can compare that to the core values in our community, our local community. And that's something that novice learners can do, even with authentic materials, because they don't have to understand everything to be able to at least conjecture what some of the core values are.
Yeah, I really liked Rebecca's intro into really saying, like, we first have to talk about what is this concept of authentic. And I would actually broaden the definition a little bit more. I definitely agree that they're really focusing on materials that were not created for the purpose of language learning, right? So you have your textbooks, you have your like grammar activities, like that's not what we're talking about. But I would include, when we talk about the target culture, sometimes that gets too narrow and we forget that some of our own students are members of the target culture, or some people who maybe weren't necessarily born as, I teach Spanish, they weren't born as a Spanish speaker, but they might also be members of the target culture. So immigrant populations, for example. So I really like to keep that definition of authentic really broad, and really just say that these are materials that exist within our, target culture, that don't exist for language learning purposes, but they can be created by a variety of audiences, whether or not they might fit the stereotypical, target culture, narrative.
Yeah, I do like working with definitions and creating a framework where we can understand what's happening. I also like Paris's view of purpose, because not just looking at the product, but why. And I do think it's a really good place to really think about starting at surface products, which are very visible, to really thinking about perspectives that go deeper as to why, a culture would use it, when do they use it, and in what way. And I think really getting to some of the questions and framing the questions around allowing students to investigate and providing them the boundaries to be able to look at, certain resources, whatever articles I might bring into the classroom, directing them to some of the websites where they can then explore. And within that limitation of allowing them, this is what I would like you to get out of this activity, this is what I would like you to be able to see, and then really coming together to share more open-ended perspectives. I really like allowing students to also have a personal connection and then to give their opinion.
Yeah, I really love the word that you used, Lyanne, investigate, because I think that really, when we think back to the original question, is how do we get beyond just the products to the perspectives? I think that's where oftentimes world language classes stop short, right? We name the products. We just it's like a presentation, right? Here's a product from the culture. Here's a product from the culture. Here's a product from the culture. But when we use that word, like you said, investigate, now it's an exploration. And that's where we're going to start going deeper and deeper and really get to the perspectives. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
As someone who also works with novice learners, I like the inquiry component about that, and just even sparking some curiosity, back to what Paris was talking about, even getting them to make some simple speculations. But I really see part of my goal is even just sparking some of that curiosity and encouraging them to question and to wonder and to ask questions, hypothesize. But be careful about treading that line about stereotyping or making broad assumptions that might not be true.
Well, this makes me think of, you remember back in the olden days when the AP test first shifted back in the 2010s. I don't know, I'm showing my age here, but it really asks for a cultural comparison. And that was like a brand new thing. And I just remember some of my colleagues who were reading, especially for the French test, they were like, okay, it's Paris, baguettes, and wine, right? And for Hispanics, it's, flamenco and, all of these products, which in the past, I guess, I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but, that kind of was, we felt like we were really doing something to get them to recognize that products are connected to a culture. But our next question, and y'all are kind of being so nice to wait to address it until we got here, is moving away from this idea of products. We really need to move forward. It's not all just baguettes, wine, and the Eiffel Tower. This idea of practices. And I think even novice learners or young learners can reach the practices, and the more they are able to understand the differences in practices and products, that's really going to help them get to perspectives. Maybe I'm oversimplifying, but how do y'all see this relationship in the transition from investigating certain aspects then to moving up the 3 Ps to practices? How does that happen? Nobody wants a stab at that?
What you were saying, Greta, they're very, they're all interconnected. Like, I have a really hard time like separating products versus practices versus perspectives, because sometimes they're so, like, the lines between them get so blurred in between, is this a product? Is it a practice? It's kind of used for both. But what I will say is, one thing that I think is interesting is that in my approach, when I'm actually in the classroom, both practices and products are very visible, right? I can see the practice of kissing somebody on 2 cheeks, right? I can see the practice of celebrating a certain holiday. I can describe it. They're visual, as with products. But it goes back to that, Rebecca used inquiry, Lyanne used investigate, but like, it really goes back to asking deeper questions. Like, so they have this practice, but why? I think of like I have a son who's 4 and a son who's 6, and he's always like, but why? But why? But why? Right? And that's really what we want. We want, when it comes to intercultural competence or interculturality, it's really this inquisitive but why kind of nature, and that's what we can't see. So I think that's sometimes when we struggle as language teachers, because we can see the practices, we can name them, we can see the products, we can name them, but when we get to perspectives, like, people argue about it, right? This is where it's like deep-seated beliefs, like, I don't think that's the practice or the perspective, right? Like, it gets a little bit harder, but I think also that's where the fun part of language learning happens too.
Yeah, I would have to agree that I do like it, more of like a framework where they're all connected, perspectives, practices, and products. I mean, I think maybe it's related to the former standards and how they were just visually displayed differently. But I do like that idea. And I also think kind of looking at what you were saying about it being visible versus not as visible and not as apparent, and where there may be disagreement in perspectives. I do like that. And I was trying to think about a way to explain it. And I was thinking about the Venn diagram. It seems so simplistic to think like you could put things that are obviously very different, like on the outsides, and then whatever's on the inside would be, really like what would seem to be the same. But then as you like just focus in on what seems to be the same, I feel like, wow, there's so much more exploration that's involved. Like, really, just a day? Are we just talking about day? Are we talking about specific time? And does that change year to year? Are we talking about evening, or does this happen like over the course of days that would then mean the preparation is involved? And I just think there's so much more depth that would come as you do explore. And I think just moving away from the product itself to really encapsulating that idea of the practice that's involved, the rituals and maybe the religion and whatever else is involved with that, I think just brings such a richness and such a, like, from black and white to color. That's what it seems like for me.
Well, and I would say a piece that can really bring it alive is also bringing in the student cultures and perspectives. At least in my class, I have students from, I mean, we don't really share a common culture. And we're all kind of like mixed. I have a lot of bilingual kids in my class that don't speak the language I teach necessarily. So taking time to explore their own culture and what their own perspectives are, and then comparing that and contrasting it to the target cultures, and then with the bigger goal of coming to the conclusion that it's not one belief that is superior to another, that we need to value all the perspectives and gather the perspectives, and that way the individual student feels like they have something really to say and contribute to the class, their perspective, that their perspective feels valued. Because even if they travel to another country, they're still going to maintain their identity and their core beliefs. They just need to be open about accepting others' beliefs.
I love what you just said so much. I mean, I wish we had like little heart emojis in here. I've gotten so used to that world where you emoji everything. I think sometimes I feel there's a fine line as we bring in different cultural products and practices, because some of the things that are very, very different to our students are the things that most capture their attention. But I don't want to make the target culture appear so foreign and bizarre or something like that. So treading that fine line. And I work in a community where we have a large population of students who are from India, and I've never thought about teaching Spanish as making connections to my students' families' heritage. And just exactly along the lines of what you said, I find that we have some of the most interesting conversations around perspectives when we're connecting, not back to our own culture here in the United States, but when students are able to connect to their birth cultures, their families' cultures. And it brings such a richness into the conversations when we have those contributions from the immigrant communities, because it does feel like it makes those realia or whatever it is that we're talking about, the products and practices and trying to get at the perspectives, so much more interesting to them. I will say I'm often, and I'll be kind of frank, I feel kind of uncomfortable myself, not coming from the target culture, feeling like I can be an authority on what that perspective is. And I'm really careful about finding ways to ensure that my students aren't making stereotypes about the target cultures. And at the novice level, where they don't quite have the language yet to have very complex conversations, you have to simplify things, but I worry about the dangers of simplifying so much that I'm then stereotyping, the target culture.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid concern, especially considering like when we talk about products and practices, they're a lot easier to simplify. And again, maybe because they're visible, right? I can lift something up and point to it and say, this is what it is. But when it comes to perspectives, I think that's like the elephant in the room here. Like, how do I talk about perspectives with novice students who have very limited language? What does that look like? Because I think that's oftentimes why we do resort to teaching the products and the practices, because it's a lot easier in novice language. At least in my experience, it's easier in novice language. And sometimes we unfortunately stop there, which, like Rebecca says, it unfortunately creates stereotypes for our students.
I had a really long conversation one time with Mimi Met. You know how Mimi is. And our conversation all rolled around the purpose of cultural competence, and we never came to a conclusion. But so this might add to our conversation here tonight. Is it the goal to be able to slip into the culture and be unrecognizable? Or is the goal to be an acceptable outsider? Or is it not on either end, but somewhere in the middle? Y'all help me argue this with Mimi, because I was at a loss.
I another panel just to argue this question.
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I feel like my goal is to empower students to be able to ease into the discomfort of interacting with a world that's different from theirs, and to be able to kind of settle into it and observe it and interact with it respectfully. I don't know that I expect them to be able to just blend in, nor if they should have to, because they have their own identities. But I would say my biggest goal is that they can lean into the discomfort of things that are different, without, like, that I'm giving them the tools to be able to do that, whether it be in Spanish or a different culture, that they've learned those tools for interacting respectively in being okay with being in something that's different and uncomfortable.
I think one of the words you used was just really stood out to me in terms of identities. I really feel like it's when students, I mean, I teach at the high school level, so I feel like they're still, trying to figure themselves out, trying to like decide like how much of their parents they're still trying to hold on to, and how much they're still trying to break away from their parents and really be who they feel they can be, or they should be, or whatever that would mean. And I think part of this interculturality has to do with moving them from that self to others, and like taking, just view of just, it's all about me, right? It's all about the yo, and then my own world, and talking about from my framework to like, well, how do I then develop empathy? Because someone else is not living my same experience, so it's not necessarily whether you're authentic, inauthentic, whether this is my culture or not my culture, because really our culture, I mean, I to some degree, I think it's a social construct, right? So in terms of where are the boundaries for, I mean, yes, generalizations and people or whatever, we organize and we have to organize, but at the same time, I'm like, how do we then move students from that? And part of it is just really, in a sense, kind of getting them in touch with who they are. We do these cultural wheels in our classroom to really focus in. And if you're 100%, how do you divide that with who and what and how you spend your time? And so, when they look at their best friend and they're like, oh, my best friend, which we seem like the same part of the Venn diagram, we seem very similar. We're, brought up in Colorado, here we are, we've gone to the same community, same schools, whatever that is. But we are, my family's so focused on sports, they really care about music and art, and it starts to really allow them to see beyond just the exterior, to really start seeking some of that internal pieces that I think are so important with identity. And then that really helps them to then understand the language, not just separated, like not just target language, but embedded within context, within cultures.
Yeah, I love that. Like I said, I have a lot of thoughts about this. I think going back, I really love what both you, Lyanne, and Rebecca said. And I think too, like it's not our decision for the students whether or not they should seamlessly slip in or if they should be themselves, right? Because I think of some of my students who are from minoritized populations, and I say, you know what? If they need as a survival technique to just blend in with the culture for whatever reason, like I think of a member of the LGBTQ community, maybe they don't want to out themselves and they just want to fit in with the dominant narrative at the time, then that's not my decision to make. And same thing, I think, with intercultural competence. There are times where I want my students to feel like I am, this is my identity and I'm proud of who I am and I want to let that shine in a different culture. But there's another time where they're going to say, I need to slip into this culture for whatever reason. So I think that's their decision to make. And going back to what Rebecca said, it's my job as a teacher to give them the tools so that way, whichever decision they make, they're prepared to do that. So for me, that's what intercultural competence is about. Like, I want to empower my students to feel comfortable where they are, no matter what culture they're in. And really, I don't remember if it was Rebecca or Lyanne that said it, but really have that empathy and be able to decenter, like Lyanne was saying, it's not about me. I need to decenter my perspective and say, let me consider this from a different culture's perspective. So I'm gonna slip into this other culture. I'm gonna consider things from their perspective, and then I'm gonna make a decision that suits me based on my needs and who I am.
This is really interesting. Y'all are the right people to discuss this conversation. Yeah. Okay, let's go to our next question, because this is also, I think there's some room for conversation here. What really is a culture-rich classroom environment? What is not a culture-rich classroom environment? I think to me, I often see this question as the same kind of comparison between products and practices and perspectives, right? Is it just my Guatemalan rug or textile on the wall that makes it culture rich? And I'm not, I'm a German teacher, so for me, it's like I can't just have lederhosen around everywhere, and beer is not allowed in schools in Texas. So what is it, that really is a culturally rich environment for my learners, along with that immersion language? What's the immersion culture that we want to see? What is this culture rich environment?
I had to ask you a question back, Greta. And I'm not being facetious, but why is this? Okay. Why was this question not first?
Well,
and
good question. It's letter C.
Okay.
So we're
why isn't it letter A? And I'm asking that because it's kind of the answer to my question. I feel like that kind of needs to be where we start. Yeah, okay. Just like use of the target language is not negotiable, making our learning environment culture rich is not negotiable. And that should be the first question, because then you can get into exploring the products and perspectives and the practices. But you have to start, in my opinion, with a culture rich environment. Okay, so move them around there, please.
I have to agree, Rebecca, because I was trying to not answer the questions like starting with the last one, because I feel like the next question coming up about how do you connect with local and global communities, that really starts the conversation. Because I think like what changed me, what made me a language teacher was travel, was going to places, was living in the culture, was eating their food, was sitting with them in their house, was hanging out on their step, in the evening, watching people go by. And that has really like allowed me to kind of think about like, how do you get those experiences into the classroom? How do you get the students themselves to maybe eventually travel or take a student trip, or, and these are things that we can't necessarily do right now, but then how can they virtually take those field trips? How can they, connect with the local opportunities that we have? And I feel like that then decides like, yes, of course, I need to speak target language in my classroom and have those, side conversations and interactions with students in target language, because that's how they'll be interacting with real people, hopefully in their lives within our own local community.
Well, then I would ask a follow-up question. I'd take Rebecca's point, and we'll bring that up at a meeting, I'm sure. But so is the culture-rich environment really the instruction that's going on? Could I have my class in the broom closet and still have it be a culture-rich environment? I guess that's a question, because some of us are better than others at, creating this aura, if you will, of being in the country. So is that a handicap if I'm not that good at actually is it the decorating the room?
I'll step in here and Rebecca knows where I'm going with this, because as an elementary teacher, we are often not privileged to have a classroom. So I am like teaching Spanish a la carte. Like, we have our basket of goodies, and I go into one classroom for, my classes are currently 25 minutes long. I go in for 25 minutes, I leave, I go to another classroom for 25 minutes. So I wish I had the opportunity to create like that physical experience of like, I'm in Spain now, I'm in Guatemala, I'm in, but we make do with what we have. So I don't think that creating a culture rich environment, I think the physical decorations of your classroom, I think can certainly help that. It can help transport students into that mindset. But I think it actually goes back to what Lyanne was saying. And so I'm gonna say that we should start with question number 4 first. It comes at it's how are you connecting with community? Because even when we talk about culture, sometimes we talk about culture like it's this thing that just exists somewhere out there, right? Like it's like this thing that we can define and put in a box neatly and put a little bow around it. But like Rebecca and I are in the same state, right? We're both from Connecticut. We're both white women from Connecticut. We have different cultures. I guarantee it. So when we talk about culture-rich environments, I think it really comes down to the people. So how are we connecting with target language communities? How are we bringing in people into our classroom? I think that not so much the physical environment of our classroom, but how are we connecting to these real live people who use the language on an everyday basis? So our students can then begin to imagine themselves as part of these communities. They say, I want to be part of this community. And I therefore have to use the language in order to participate in this community.
Paris, what do you think?
Thanks, Rebecca. I really appreciate all that you're all saying. And I guess I want to add that for me, all those things are very true. And when I'm designing curriculum, I really have to start with a really meaty, essential question. And then I sometimes have to loop back around and say, yeah, but where's the interculturality in that? Let me explain so I may start with an essential question like, what do we do that's good for the environment? Well, one, that's like a very white US perspective. So then when I go deeper and I investigate that in South America, it's more about sustainable communities, right? So what do we do to create sustainable communities? And then when I dig even deeper, I want to add the interculturality on that. I'm going to ask myself, what is it about the cultural values in South America that actually empowers them to focus on sustainable communities? So that I'm just layering on, so that we're not just doing the environment, because there's a real difference when solidarity, if you bring up a wordle of core values of Latin America, solidarity is really big. I am sure if you brought up the core values of US white people, it would not be solidarity. It would not be the biggest word. So just kind of looking at how through some of the different perspectives, different attitudes, we can then, we just have a different way of looking at a problem. And then that empowers the students, because like my young people students, they're very impassioned by a topic like that. Like they really want to talk about that. They have really strong things to say about that. So that allows them then to have a much deeper discussion than if we were just talking about the words for recycling. You see what I'm saying? I'm trying to take it much deeper.
Yeah, I think it's so important, like you said, start with that essential question, because especially if you're using that backwards design model, you can't discuss any of these things if you have a really lame, for another word, like a really lame essential question. That's where it all begins. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
It's so interesting. Sorry, that recycling piece, and even about how that's in kind of the AP themes, isn't it? There's something, maybe not specifically recycling, but about caring for the environment. But that's such a different cultural perspective and value. And as you were talking, I was thinking of my mother-in-law who passed away several years ago, but in Uruguay, who had stacks and stacks and stacks of like butcher paper wrapped up and saved in her cabinets, and like takeout pizza cardboard trays that she let the cheese grease dry on, and then she put them away, and she was just saving them. We never knew for what. And for us, that's like this recycling perspective. For her, it was just, you don't waste things. This might have a purpose, and I'm not going to waste it. She didn't have necessarily environmental values that she was concerned about so much as, this costs money and I paid for it when it was or whatever. I'm not going to waste it, and not wasting. And so it was kind of coming at that ultimate end goal, but from a different perspective.
Perspective. There's that
right
too. Yeah.
Right. Sorry, Lyanne, I cut you off.
No, you're fine. I was just thinking, there's so many pieces to this, because I was thinking about Dorie not having the classroom. And then even if you have the classroom, what kind of things are you going to put up on the walls, but very, very obvious, very surfacey differences. And yes, I have my Kellogg's box from Mexico that I dragged back with me 20 years ago, back in the day. But now I feel like and yes, the planning has so much a part of that, because now I can plan to visually have them visit that museum in Mexico. I can have them visually walk through the airport and then experience what that might look like to some degree, and really provide them these experiences through technology. I feel like we are such in an age where access is so much more, available to us and to our students, and having to teach in a time where the district has, made more of an effort to provide more access to more students and more families. I'm thinking this is really a great time in the midst of teachers like trying to juggle the in-person, partial, 100%, like this constantly shifting. Regardless, I still feel like this planning and focusing on the essential questions and still really trying to really get to know our students, and then understanding where they are and trying to move them along that spectrum and range toward transformative learning, something that is going to allow their view to be different, to never ever be the same, to fall in love with the language, the people, the culture, and want to always travel and be able to be uncomfortable, like you had mentioned, Rebecca, being comfortable in your discomfort.
Can I circle back? Sorry, can I circle back to something that Paris said too? And I think we started off this conversation about the teaching, the physical environment, and I do have to tell you, Greta, that my back to school dream every single year is that they've assigned me to teach in a broom closet, and I don't have enough seats for all my. I swear to God, I have a back to school nightmare every year that they've assigned me to a broom closet. So it's really interesting that you somehow tapped into my inner psyche there. But I do think it's important to recognize the physical environment, but also how we're designing our learning goals. And as much as, whether it's your cart that you're pushing around or the classroom that you're teaching in, I think it's important to bring as a culture, the environment into that, the culture into that environment. But I also feel very strongly that culture needs to be at the core of our curricular planning, and it needs to be part of that stage one, as Dorie referred to, backwards planning. Those goals, that it can't just be we're going to study houses, and then I might add in a little tidbit about houses and the culture. Hopefully, we're not doing a unit just on houses, or there's something more thematic than that. But that when you're starting at that stage one, that culture is at the center of it, is at the core of it.
Do you find that planning the questions you ask help that? I mean, do you just have that in your mind and you teach and you hope they fall into that realization, or do you feel like it has to take more of an active intentionality on your part in order for them to see beyond my dream house, or to see beyond, no, we don't have trains here in Texas, and why is that, and they do in Germany, why is that? And I guess from an instructional standpoint, is this something that if I'm a novice, if I have novice instructional proficiency, do I attack it? Because obviously it's not going to happen if we just let it, right? You can't just lay it out there. Where do I begin to enter into this deeper? Through my questions, or is it, what do y'all think?
Well, when you're designing the instruction, you would have like a unit level, I call it now the result of the unit, just because I don't want it confused with the micro can-do state. So in each of the modes, right? So I have an interpersonal speaking goal for the end of the unit. I have a interpretive goal. I have a presentational goal. And then each daily lesson has a can-do statement that's very finite, that you measure at the end, at least, maybe at the beginning and the end, that directly aligns to one or multiple of those unit outcomes. And at every stage of the way, the cultural piece needs to be in the can-do statement, in the unit outcome. And so it's like a nesting doll of can-do statements, if you will.
Yeah, that's like the perfect way to look at it. And I really feel like you said, if it's not at every single stage of the way, it's not going to happen on its own. I would say too, if there's a novice teacher who's just kind of getting into this, the other big part in terms of curriculum planning is language use. I mean, I said it before, but novices aren't going to be able to discuss, explain perspectives, right? Explaining is not a novice. I can explain is not a novice can-do statement. So I think really when it comes down to, thinking about your can-dos and thinking about the kinds of questions you ask, I really love the ACTful, there's the intercultural reflection tool, and it talks about how we do this in-class portion in the target language. And then they have to be able to reflect on it to really get to the deeper perspectives. And as teachers, we need to plan ahead. Are they going to have the language to be able to discuss perspectives or have a disagreement? We were talking about perspectives can often disagree. I will tell you what, my first graders in their novice Spanish cannot have a disagreement about cultural perspectives in Spanish. So when I'm planning for my unit, I need to know that. But I also don't want to say, well, they can't do it, so it's not important. So I need to come up with creative solutions. So, at the elementary level, I'm blessed that I can, partner and collaborate with the classroom teachers and say, hey, let's co-plan a lesson. So they're doing a portion of it in their social studies unit or in their science unit even, where they can have these deeper discussions in English. I know in other classes, they do like a journal reflection. That's their homework, in English, again, because they don't have the language proficiency. So I don't want teachers to forget about that aspect of curriculum planning too, is that some of these conversations, they do not have the language to participate in if they have novice proficiency.
All right. Well, thanks for entertaining my question. Rebecca, you want to add to that?
I kind of have a related question for everyone in the room, the collective wisdom of the room. Mm-hmm. When I'm talking to a lot of teacher colleagues about this cultural component, and as people are kind of on that learning journey with incorporating more culture, I often hear teachers say, I can't teach about Chile because I've never been there. Or I can't teach about this place because I only ever lived in Spain for study abroad. And I'm wondering what kind of advice you have for that teacher for how I guess some teachers who maybe can develop some confidence around their own intercultural competencies.
Well, nobody's an expert on any culture because you only have your perspective, right?
I know. Yep.
So isn't it more, I think Lyanne said this, more of an inquiry. We're going to inquire together as a class community. Right? Yeah. I don't know. Help me out. Yeah. Come on.
That's what I've always said, that what we need to model for them is how to respectfully inquire about a culture. And so we need to be able to do that ourselves. But I don't know if other people have heard that teachers, I pretty frequently hear teachers say, I can't teach about that country because I've never been there. I only lived here.
Yeah, I've heard it.
Yeah. I know Lyanne kind of hinted at the fourth question here about really how do we bring communities into our classroom? And it kind of goes to that third question of creating a culture-rich classroom. I am not, even if I've been to Spain, I am not the expert of Spanish culture. I am Puerto Rican. I am not the expert of Puerto Rican culture whatsoever. But I think in creating a culture-rich classroom, how are we inviting target language communities to speak for themselves, right? And that's where it comes into bringing in authentic resources. I am not the authority on any culture. One single person isn't the authority on their own culture. So how are we inviting these communities to represent themselves within our classroom? And it goes to what, Lyanne and Paris was just alluding to, it's an inquiry. We're all going to find this out together.
Excellent. So thank you, Dorie, for bringing us to our last question of the evening. So this is how do we connect our students with the culture, basically, is what this is, because we're back now to the question of we will never be able to slip inside any culture that's not our own, but maybe not an acceptable outsider, but a respectful outsider is the better term for. So let's go ahead and begin exploring this idea of bringing the culture into the classroom through speakers or through the world, or how can we do that? How can we mesh all this together? All these four questions, really, no matter what order they're in, are about the same thing. And this is really one of those conversations that probably everyone hopefully has an aha moment or a moment where they just realize I've got to get better at this. This is the proficiency is our goal, but I also have to get better at this as well.
I guess I just wanted to add on to from the previous conversation on the previous question, just thinking about my own travels, and then how dated they have become, and then what is really happening now in that culture, and how dynamic language is, culture is, and how things change, and just within our own community here, how many things have changed within the past 10 years. So then, that putting that into perspective really helps me to think like, well, of course I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly trying to like upkeep and maintain my own Spanish, and upkeep and maintain my own, like just about social justice nowadays, and, multiculturalism, and just so many different areas that I feel I just need to do better and be better on. And at the same time, I think it's okay for us to just craft our units in such a way that students are given that independence to also research and look at, credible sites, so that they could then determine for themselves, what kind of information am I getting, and, what's actually seems to be happening in that culture. And when I find, a video of that celebration, like, what does that tell me? And really trying to like use, to some degree, I'm not a scientist, but then like some scientific skills for observation. Like, are you really looking carefully? Like, how many people are really there? What time of day is that? How long do you think this is going on? And what do their faces express? Are they really happy? And they're, carrying this for 13 hours. I mean, and at the same time, there's a sense of pride, or there's a sense of whatever, and really allowing them, and all of us, to learn in the process, and being okay with not having to be the expert in the room, but being intentional in my planning to facilitate the learning and direct it to where I would like them to be. Which didn't necessarily address question 4, but.
No, I think it did. I think it did.
Okay.
I'm sitting here eagerly waiting for the magic bullet solution to this question, because I do feel, I think Greta said this, I think this is one of our biggest challengers as language educators, is bringing our students, and particularly, Dorie teaching, working with younger learners, bringing them into target language communities, and bringing target language communities into their world. And I think the pandemic has exacerbated the difficulties with that.
Unfortunate that because we cannot grade it, it doesn't seem like it's that important to the curriculum. But at the same time, I feel like it's a driving piece of allowing students to connect to real people, whether that is locally, right here in Thornton, Colorado, or beyond, really. And that's really the challenge. But seeking the guest speakers, seeking the person down the hall that also speaks Spanish that can come into the room. And we've exchanged classrooms with, the other Spanish teachers to be able to teach other classes, which is always a challenge with schedules. But, trying to make things work so that students do get more exposure and can hear language differently. And I do like using a lot of videos.
Yeah, it's funny because I know, Rebecca, you mentioned that you felt like the pandemic has kind of like exacerbated us going out, like it prevents us from like not being able to go into the community. And, I know our exchange programs have been canceled, and, like we can't even like talk to our neighbors. But at the same time, I feel there are so many new opportunities, because now people are seeking community in ways that our students actually can be involved in. Like,
Absolutely.
Yeah, like I look at one of the questions I actually ask myself is, how are target language speaking communities finding community when they can't physically be present? Like that's like an essential question I had for myself, right? So then like, how also can my students be involved in any of those communities? And I think sometimes we have to remember that like, it's not always appropriate for our students to just like crash in, like we talk about like, like white saviorism, like I'm going to go to this country and I'm just going to impose my, beliefs. But like sometimes it's just like a respectful, like watching and listening. So, is it appropriate for our students to be watching like TikTok videos? Like, can they enjoy the community from that perspective? Can they watch Instagram reels? Again, curated specifically for teachers, but that is honestly how many adults and teenagers are connecting with their communities right now. So I think oftentimes when we think about communities, we think about us going into communities rather than allowing the communities to represent themselves in our classrooms. Like, how do communities represent themselves publicly? And then we can bring that into our classroom. I think that's a really important way for us to connect to communities as well.
I think certainly, and I agree with everything you just said. And even, you know, like there's so many young YouTubers out there who do daily, this is me and my friends hanging out. And those are such fun windows into the target language communities. But I'm really interested in finding ways that they can actually actively interact with target language communities. And as much as like the TikTok and Instagram and YouTube are all really fun windows, there you can't interact with a YouTube video.
They can though. Like, you know, I think I would push back and say, like, you know, through comments, through creating their own videos and using certain hashtags, I think that they can involve themselves in these communities. I do think there's value in, you know, again, like, you know, I have my students, we're before the pandemic hit, we were trying to partner with a local lawyer here in Connecticut to like try to change this law that we think is unjust for Spanish speakers, yada, yada, yada. And it got canceled. Like, I do think there's value in those things, but I also think that we should look at ways that they can, you know, can they create their own TikTok video and interact with people? Like, when I use social media, it's social, it's not just viewing.
What do you think, Paris?
Well, I appreciate all you guys' reflection. I'm thinking, because we're moving to a concurrent model. We just got ordered back to school in person, and so the teachers will have half their class in the room, the other half at home, and then a bunch of kids are always at home that never come in person. All in the same class, and my poor world language teachers got hit hard with really tough schedules. So I've been thinking about this, trying to think about the positive. And what I mean by that is, they've installed millions of dollars of cameras in all our classrooms. So in the future, is this not an opportunity to then connect each and every kid? Because in the past, if I'm honest, it's only like 3 of my kids that would travel to a Spanish-speaking country. But maybe what if they could connect? What if each and everyone could connect with you know, some friend I have in, I don't know, in Mexico, that they would then, you know, show I'm just thinking, it's making me think that there's actually opportunities to connect that were always there, but until the pandemic came, we weren't really thinking outside the box. So I'm soaking in all you guys' good ideas. And
yeah, there's a lot of value in that. Like, I do think that for too long, we've sold foreign language and interculturality as someday you're going to interact with these people and you have to spend a lot of money and go abroad to do it. And we fail to recognize. So when we talk about interculturality, like I said, like Rebecca and I, same state, have different cultures. Like, how do we even, you know, have our students interculturally talk to their peers, right, within their own classroom? And then how do we use this expensive equipment to help them connect with their local community outside of their classroom, you know, within the city, but the state, and then expand outwards from there. So I do think there's a lot of value in that as well.
Oh my gosh. I feel like there's just so many ideas, so much going around. Again, y'all are the perfect folks to talk about this. I know y'all can't believe it, but our time is drawing short. And as we leave today, this evening, I'd like to give y'all a chance to speak personally to the teachers out there that are either listening now or will be listening. If there were one thing, maybe it's the novice teacher, maybe it's the teacher who's been teaching a while, who just hasn't yet, he or she has done is dipped a toe, right? All they've done is just dipped a toe in. And they need an action step, right? They need an action step. So just pause and let's think about it. And I'd like to give y'all an opportunity to speak for a little bit, just directly out there. This is a thorny topic in the sense that so many layers. I heard Lyanne use that word earlier this evening. It's such a layered topic in terms of how do we get what we want to happen. So who would like to share their thought? And I'll give y'all the whole screen. So
I've heard a lot of talk lately as teachers are trying to make the shift towards more proficiency-based instruction, that they get the recommendation that they just try to take one unit and make some major changes in it. And I find that when teachers do that, they're often sold. And so I would say maybe take just one unit you have and rethink that unit from the beginning, and how you from the very, very beginning can put culture at the center of that unit, and culture as your, a cultural context as your starting point.
Okay, thank you so much. Who would like to offer a solution next? An idea.
I'll share. I was just thinking about how often the most enthusiastic learners we have in our classroom, sometimes those shining stars really encourage us to keep moving forward in the midst of being overwhelmed and overworked and exhausted. And I also feel like we just never know how our intentionality is affecting the students who are not as outward in expressing to us how this is possibly shifting their internal thinking and their perspectives. And so kind of thinking about that student that really kind of outwardly expresses enthusiasm toward language learning and passion, but at the same time, providing that love over all our students, not knowing, which ones are really going to continue the journey of proficiency and language and culture, and at the same time being okay that whatever you're doing in moving yourself toward more interculturality and more proficiency and whatever that would mean, that you're doing great, because I just need to be okay with myself and where I'm at, because I just feel so inadequate right now and not on par with where I would like to be and do, but I am doing the very best I can for the times that I'm in, and I think that does reflect to students how much I care about them first, and then the curriculum second.
Yeah.
Excellent. Dorie, Paris?
Paris, you looked like you were about to say something. You want to jump in?
Well, you guys have sparked so many great ideas. If I'm talking to a novice teacher, which, as I've said, that's kind of all of us right now, right? I think one thing I would think is, if you're doing like a more typical vocabulary unit, think about one thing you could do, even with novice learners, is thinking about teaching maybe 6 core values. And then you can teach them some, just as vocabulary, then you could teach them some sentence stems, just to dip your toe in the idea, to get some, kind of, because the truth is, like, kids, especially if you teach high school and you've got beginners, you need to elevate the discussion, because they can only talk about clothing items so long before they get bored. And also, am I asking you what color my dress is? Well, unless you're blind, I don't know why you're asking. Right? So upping the level so that we're actually talking about something meaningful to the students, so that your heritage speakers will perk up and have something to say. Just try to level up any way you can. And then I hear you, Lyanne, and give yourself a lot of grace, when we all fail, because we will, have challenging times. Just give yourself grace, give your students grace. But I do feel like the more we up the focus on a meaning-based conversation, the more conversation you actually get out of the students.
All right, Dorie.
I'm over here taking notes because I'm like, I would say to somebody who's just getting started that interculturality starts with you as the teacher. So we talk a lot of times about helping our students develop intercultural competence, but it really starts with ourselves and going through those same processes that we expect of our students of self-reflection. And, I think it was Rebecca talking about, helping their students become uncomfortable or comfortable in uncomfortable situations. Like, we need to also be going through those experiences. So when we talk about, for example, connecting our students to communities, we can't do that unless we have meaningful connections to communities. So I would just encourage all the teachers out there to develop their own intercultural competence first. See what you're doing on a daily or weekly or monthly basis to really have those deep reflective experiences, and try to make some meaningful community connections, so you don't have to wait another 10 years to go abroad to Spain, but you're having these intercultural experiences on a daily basis.
Y'all are so good. Thank y'all so much for being here tonight. And I just want to say to our audience, cheers for these ladies. They have really given us a lot to think about. I hope you check out the NFLC YouTube channel, because this conversation will be there. And it's something I think we want to share with everyone. This has just really been a great conversation. So thank y'all. I appreciate y'all being on the panel. I will say this has been the best one yet, because this has just been fantastic. Y'all are wonderful. Thank everybody out there. Thank everyone who checks us out, and everyone have a good evening.
Good night, everyone.